So welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning if you're joining us in the States, or maybe you're watching this back on record. Thanks for joining the webinar, ABM in the New Normal, a practitioner's guide we've called it. For those who don't know me or us, I'm David Van Schaik. I'm CMO at the marketing practice. We're a full service B2B agency. We've been running ABM programs with our clients since at least 2007 when we ran our first event on ABM. So we've seen it go through several ages, I think, in that time, and I think we're about to maybe enter another era for ABM. So that's what we're going to discuss today. So thank you, Kate, Mike, and Mark for joining us. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves in a minute, but just before I do that, a couple of points of order just to let everyone know we're recording this webinar, so we'll make sure the webinar recording is made available afterwards. And just to encourage people to ask questions as we go. This is just going to be a discussion, if you like. There's some questions that I've prepared and shared with the panelists, but if you want to try and catch them off guard, we'll try and take the questions as we go, and we'll also try and make sure there's time for questions at the end. So I think just to sort of briefly set the scene, I think, one of the things that we find really interesting at the moment is, it's been a harem scarum last 3 months, lots of changes. I think one of the things that we're really interested in is the change that we're seeing perhaps in the buyer experience and what things look like from the customer's point of view, which is always a good perspective for an ABMer. And I think we've got, on the one hand, this the fact that there's going to be smaller budgets, probably conservatism around cash, but there's also this need to transform, to change how workplaces work, how business models work, propositions, and so on. So that's a really pressurized environment for any customer, and I think helping customers to navigate that environment feels like a big opportunity for ABM. At the same time that businesses' priorities have changed, there's changes in who we're targeting, in the propositions maybe we're taking out to market. It's kind of been all hands to the pump, I think, over the last 3 months to help adapt to the new environment. So that's what we're going to explore today, hopefully. What does that mean for ABM programs? How should we be thinking particularly about the next 6-12 months? What changes might we want to embrace and hold on to? So helping us to sort of unpack that all this afternoon, we've got Kate Owen and Mike Green from Capita and Mark Larwood from OT. So if I can ask you guys just to spend a minute or two introducing yourself and explaining a bit about where you guys are on the ABM journey for the audience. Maybe we could start with you, Kate.
Yeah, so thanks very much for having me. So I've worked probably and led teams in marketing and comms now for over 20 years. I've worked at organisations like Starbucks, Thomson Reuters and the NHS prior to Capita. My role at Capita is as director of ABM, and then most recently also looking after the wider go-to-market campaign division too. I suppose from an ABM angle, the team that I lead at Capita have a dual responsibility for ABM and industry marketing, and we work with some of the biggest brands across the private sector, across broad sets of multiple industries. So for me, it's exciting to be able to be part of that and tailor approaches across kind of different sectors that all have different customer challenges, more now so than ever. Great.
Thank you for joining us. And Mike, maybe we'll go to you next. I know you work with Kate quite closely.
Yeah, mainly on webinars like this, actually, David. But yeah, I'm Mike Green. I do have the CIM diploma, but I've never worked in marketing in my life. But I've always worked alongside marketing teams. So my background's in key account management, building key account strategies, leading teams, and working alongside marketing to grow and retain customer relationships. That's what my career's been all about. I've done that in a variety of B2B companies, American Express, GE Capital, PwC, worked in a variety of sectors as well across technology, insurance, payments and professional services. More recently, I've joined Capita 18 months ago to lead account management in the HR solutions business. So everything that kind of affects the people space in company, which is obviously a really fascinating area. And in my spare time, I also volunteer as a board member for the Association for Key Account Management, trying to professionalise CAM as a discipline as distinct from sales, particularly, but also promoting best practices in all things account management.
Great, thanks. And I think it's one of my personal bugbears about how many marketing events that there are, particularly ABM events that talk about the importance of marketing and sales joining up and account management, and then not having sales or account management on the speaking list. So it's good to have
It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great to be here equally. So I'm Mark Larwood. I work for O2 in our business division in business marketing. I head up our ABM advocacy and what we call our strategic customer marketing area. So I've got about 20-something years experience in tech B2B marketing, both in businesses you've probably heard of, like Philips Electronics, Atos, and now O2, and probably a few you haven't, Raining Data and M-Blocks and other organizations with some funny names. So in terms of ABM, our program's been running for a number of years now with support from the marketing practice. It's kind of two arms to our program, really. We've got a strong one-to-one ABM program, which we call Lighthouse, which has a small list of very important customers to us, 6-strong list of accounts, which we treat as audiences of one. And then a number of sort of cluster one-to-few programs focused mostly on some vertical markets or some subsegments of those, really. I think what all of these things have in common is this kind of this important aspect of insight and how we're using that to shape our comms, and that's becoming more and more important, I think, as this crisis develops. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a few moments.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into unpacking that a bit more. That's great. Thank you, guys. And for the audience benefit, there will be no slides in this session, just discussion. So if you like, you can retire to your favourite armchair, put your headphones on, a little lavender eye shade on, and just listen to us talk about ABM, if that's how you'd like to consume it. And I guess Mike, Mark, Kate, if you just raise your voices unexpectedly every so often, it'll make sure people don't actually fall asleep. So I guess just to start us off, just to get us going, maybe start with your experiences over the last 3 months. Clearly, it's been a crisis isn't always an interesting, sometimes a thrilling time to be a marketer, I think. So what's it like being a marketer, trying to run ABM programs, trying to adapt to what's happened over the last 3 months? What do you feel you've learned? Perhaps we can go the other way. Start with you, Mark.
Yeah, sure. So it's been challenging all around, hasn't it? I feel personally incredibly lucky to work for a business which has been really supportive of all of every employee, really. And I think for us, working in an organization which is in mobile, in tech, we're a provider of those services, we kind of already had all the kit and capabilities that we needed to be able to lift and shift to that kind of home working environment. So for us, at least in our B2B business division anyway, it was relatively painless. But I think, for the world at large and for many of our customers, it's a very different scenario. So I think for us, at the very outset of the challenges that we faced back in March, there was a real short-term desire to go out there with messages and support for our customers, offer our support, offer our guidance, and change our messaging around those sorts of things. So it's a kind of a very frantic couple of weeks, probably more so actually, more like a month actually, of pivoting our activity, working out what still worked, what wasn't working, what needed to be replanned, pulling together propositions which really, really resonated with customers right now. And all of that was clearly not around selling to people. It was very much around being supportive, knowing that communications and network capabilities and all these things are really, really important at times when people are finding themselves more remote. So I think there was this very, very, very short-term focus on what we could do to help. And then now I think as things are progressing, we're getting much more into a twin sort of focus around some of those sorts of things. So not only are we thinking about what's happening right now and how can we support customers, support our business and the wider environment out there, but also thinking more longer term. And I think, you know, we're starting to see some things pivot around those sorts of things. I think a lot of things have changed forever, but some things will remain the same and some things will, you know, revert back to normal. I think it's interesting to see how those things will play out.
What give us an example of something that's changed forever, do you think?
So I think the idea that, you know, it's certainly in the medium term that people are going to go and cram themselves into a large venue, you know, cheek by jowl, and go to those sorts of events in the same to the same volume that we have done historically, I would say is, you know, for the bygone months, years, whatever. It feels to me that there's going to be much more hybrid type events programs, for example. I think, you know, and just the way that we see the nature of work developing over the next, you know, few years, you know, we're going to see fewer people probably going to the office on a as regular basis. Some of those changes which were happening out there anyway around this kind of move to more flexible, more remote, more virtual work habits have just been exacerbated by the current situation. So all of those changes change a lot of the ways that we do marketing and the way we just act as employees and how we service those people as marketeers and also as sales and key account people.
Yeah, good.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in on that. I would completely agree with all of that, and probably add to that this theme of authenticity as well. I think definitely seen as a result of COVID, this need for people to have this sense of community spirit. I think if you look at how popular, you know, the NHS Clap for Carers initiative was, that's for me the epitome of where people did have that solidarity about, you know, how are we building on trust. And I think all of that aligns into the world of ABM as well, doesn't it? And so I agree with you, actually. We as a team probably are a bit more immature in our journey. So we only started about 7 months or so ago. And for us, I think when COVID hit, there was definitely some members of the team that were probably a bit worried about being able to, you know, how do you demonstrate value in the near term when some of the initiatives around one-to-one ABM in particular are much of a longer term viewpoint. But we haven't actually found that to be the case. And I think where my role at Capita has actually changed to look after the ABM and also wider go-to-market, it's almost given us a bit of a perfect blend, actually, in the sense that we've got the ability to move forward with ABM, given it's even more important now in terms of building client relationships in an authentic partnership-led way, but we're also able to then be in sync with all of the wider go-to-market marketing strategy that's happening across the thought leadership, the thematical, and the kind of tactical campaigns that we're delivering as well. So I think it's all changing, but there's actually really positive elements that are changing that are addressing how we kind of go to market with strategies now.
Yeah, I think you've touched on a few other things that are kind of top concerns for people, I think, particularly when they're starting out in ABM and I guess throughout the programs in scale, and how you get that scale right, and the value kind of conversation about how do you continue to prove the value to the business and do the short-term piece and the long-term piece. So I think maybe we'll hopefully get into that as we go on. Just on your point about authenticity, is there a kind of change in the style of communication that you think now? I've got this sense that it's less about talking to people and telling them what you can do and why we can do this, and more about trying to do stuff with customers.
Yeah, definitely. I think that to the point that you made, Mark, around that hard sell, that just isn't going to cut it, is it? I mean, industries have changed, organisations are facing huge challenges around how do they adapt to, you know, what they need to do moving forward for their businesses to survive. I mean, you see different examples if you look at the airline industry from one angle to the supermarket industry. I mean, how that has mobilised around COVID are two very different looks and feels. And so I think in terms of that authenticity and kind of tailoring your approach to it, one of the things that we've found is that with our wider go-to-market, we've definitely changed our tone of voice. We've definitely changed the thought leadership that we've been putting out into market to make it relevant, to make it cut through the noise so that it actually does align to customer challenges that they're experiencing right now, not what they were experiencing 6 months, 12 months ago. And some of the initiatives we've run have been a bit more human in nature, I would say. I think B2B has always not struggled, but there's always been that old kind of adage of how do you make B2B more human? And so we've been running some initiatives around what we've called the Classroom of the Future, which is it's an initiative with an organisation called Young Enterprise that actually gets the viewpoint of 4-year-olds, 7-year-olds and 11-year-olds on what responsible consumerism and financial sustainability should be moving forwards. I mean, I have a 9-year-old going on 90, so I can't wait to see what she thinks that should be versus 4-year-old. But it's been an amazing campaign to be part of, right? Because it's fun, it's real at a time when people need positivity and a bit of joy in their lives. And actually, we've used it as a way to strike conversations with key decision makers at some of our ABM programs in a very different, unique and human way. So I think campaigns like that are going to be the ones that moving forwards are the way in which to engage with people in a very different way.
Yeah, it's
I
go on, Mike.
was just going to build on Kate's point, David, about authenticity. I know it's a passion of hers, and obviously it resonates very well with key account management as well, because, you know, as key account managers, we've had to be present with our customers during this period more than ever before. And the good account managers will show up to their customers rather than trying to hide and be busy internally. And that's certainly a truism, and, you know, that will just pay out in spades in the future. The tone and balance is an important point there, because it's quite easy to be seen as a sort of ambulance chaser in all of this, and you know, there's some existential crisis out there for customers, and so you've got to be very supportive and collaborative and helpful, know your customer's business more than ever, but you can't be seen to, you know, capitalize on opportunities because of the crisis, I think, because that will be the wrong thing to do. I mean, for me, the crisis has been, it's really categorized in 3 phases, which can be summarized with perhaps some old phrases that are really sort of talking about a new problem. The first is cash is king. So the immediate reaction, you know, in our business as well, you know, is what can we do to husband cash? Because, you know, we don't know how long this is going to last for, how serious it's going to get. So that feeling around, not panic, but very short-termism, short-term planning, how are we going to pay our employees, how are we going to pay our suppliers? That was occupying those first few weeks, I think, for a lot of companies. It then moved into necessity is the mother of invention. So I think once everyone got their thinking caps on, there was a lot of developing of new opportunities. And again, you know, I think Kate and her team were at the forefront of this in Capita with the Business Unusual campaign that we did. You know, it's that that sort of crystallization of a crisis that really gets the creative juices flowing. And then I think we're now moving into what I would phrase as don't waste a good crisis. So what are the good bits we can take from, you know, new working practices, the new normal as everyone calls it, and put that into the future in terms of new working practices when hopefully we get over this particular pandemic. So, for example, we've talked about some of it before, but will all of this office space still be required? Can that be repurposed to better society? And, you know, some of the sort of lower level processes that our customers have, they're just realizing that they just don't need them anymore because the crisis has proved that they don't need them. And I think, so it's been an incredibly challenging but rewarding period. I'm not going to use the word unprecedented because that's been overused. But compared to the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, I think it's just a level above in terms of just the intensity and the challenge that it's brought to us as individuals and also to the organisations we work for.
Has it changed how you've worked with your marketing colleagues, do you think? Has it brought things sharper?
No, it really has, because I think there's been a lot of accelerated opportunities and accelerated thinking because of the circumstances that have presented themselves. And I think there's been a lot more collaboration and interaction with marketing colleagues locally in my business than there's ever been.
Mm. And you know what I think you're talking about there is the customer needs changing quite a lot, quite rapidly, and that's a really interesting challenge, isn't it, for an ABM program? So you know, for Mark and Kate, how have you dealt with that? Have you had to change the way that your the accounts that are in the program, or is it more about just the way that you're planning those accounts and trying to reflect those changing priorities in what you're in the activity that you're doing, the messages that you're taking out? How have you tackled it?
So I think from my perspective, I think, you know, it's changed in a number of ways. Clearly there was some sort of longer term propositions, kind of business transformational messages that we were previously taking to market, which are probably no longer as applicable in the short term. So a lot of our propositions became about how we can help people right now, certainly for a period of 6 to 8 weeks or so. I think only now are we starting to expand those conversations out into things that are coming forward. As I said earlier, I think, you know, there's certain kind of inexorable move towards digital transformation anyway, and this crisis is being a bit of a catalyst for that in the longer term. But in the short term, you know, people are trying to protect their businesses and also enable their employees to still remain productive in those organizations where there is actually work to be done right now. And I think, you know, if we look at our program, we've got customers in there who, you know, have never been busier. If you're a grocer, for example, others which, you know, their revenues have pretty much dried up temporarily, hopefully, but they've dried up overnight, and they've furloughed a lot of staff. So it's there's very different approaches that we're taking to those. You know, as Kate says, it's about being authentic and sensitive to those situations. So insight and understanding of what's happening in those industries broadly, but also within those accounts, you know, one by one, and the individuals within those accounts is incredibly important. And that's exactly where ABM type programs coming in. It's all about understanding what's going on.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, for us, we've definitely had to kind of relook at that list of target accounts with sales, given that things have changed. I think as a result of that, I mean, I'm definitely seeing an increase actually in the request for one-to-one ABM principles to be applied into either more one-to-few programs or actually into other deal-based marketing opportunities across Capita as a result of COVID. So I'm definitely seeing that uptick. I think the other piece that's interesting, and probably just to build on that sales and marketing alignment comment from before as well, is that to the point around customer insight and adapting it to where people are right now. I mean, social media has obviously been king, hasn't it, in the last few weeks in terms of a channel that people engage with. And so for me, we've definitely increased the amount of social listening that we're doing right now. We are definitely monitoring the accounts that are visiting our website traffic more to see what content are they consuming, who's visiting the pages. We've been doing a lot with Brandwatch and other tools to research what our customers are talking about at the moment, because I think that you can't be authentic unless you're basing it on actual true insight. Otherwise you're matching apples and pears, aren't you? So we've definitely ramped up, I would say, our approach in that. And then in terms of how we've relayed that back into the sales community, we've, since COVID started actually, we now do a new daily report. Sounds really basic, doesn't it? But we do a daily report that captures some of this insight, captures some of the key social posts that align into that. I know that there's various automated systems out there that do some of that for you, but not necessarily bringing it all together as a playback for a salesperson for a specific account. So that's what we've been doing to kind of build on that sales and marketing piece over the last 8 weeks, I would say.
Yeah, it's often there are often some basic tactics that really are effective. Is that something from your point of view, Mike? Those kind of I guess you might bracket up as kind of active listening, mightn't you? But is that something that you find as a particularly useful thing from marketing, a value that marketing brings?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually listening is a core skill for key account managers as well. So, you know, it's one of the key communication skills. I think for key account managers, we've, as ever, been striking a balance of acting as that bridge between the supplying organisation and the buying organisation. And sometimes you're at one side of the bridge and sometimes you're at the other. And you're all, you know, that could be with the same clients on different days. So some of the conversations I've been having with customers are quite difficult. So, you know, we've got customers such as gym chains or cinema chains who, you know, their revenue just dropped off a cliff. And, you know, we have to arrange furlough schemes for them. Obviously, we provide outsourced payroll services. So we have to stand up new sort of processes for them. I was getting inquiries for enhanced credit terms and things like that. So very difficult conversations around, you know, it's not, I'm sorry, but it's not Capita's job to act as your bank, almost. I put it in slightly better terms than that, but that was the kind of sentiment. But then the next day, you're kind of collaborating with them on sort of setting up their furlough scheme and the processes with HMRC, et cetera, et cetera. So it, you know, it's just that intensity of communication, and you're doing all of this in an alien environment where you're not doing it face to face. You're doing it, you know, as we are today, over a computer screen. So I think that is, you know, as well as the work that we've been doing with marketing, which has been stood up in a very short-term way, and a lot of those opportunities, as I said, have been accelerated. It's just that so much has happened during this 3-month period from a sort of customer relationship standpoint that it's just been incredible, actually, when you look back and see how far we've come in a short space of time.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and maybe we can think about sort of looking forward. Then I think you've mentioned a couple of times, Kate, the challenge of scale, and clearly, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on results. Short-term results. There's going to be, I think, likely more emphasis on new customer acquisition. I think there are a few things that will probably put more pressure on ABM to find an appropriate scale and use those one-to-one techniques, like you say, in a larger volume. You just, how have you gone about that so far? Where do you see the opportunity?
So for me, I think that, so it's around having a range of metrics around what we're supposed to be doing, right? So I think that, you know, if you're clear, when we set up ABM at Capita, we were always really clear around, you know, what is the objective of doing it? What's our playbook? What's our operating rhythm? And so we never went into it actually with the view that, you know, the sole metric against this is revenue or is the lead target. It was all around, you know, the revenue element, but relationships and how you're building those, and the reputation and how that spawns into brand awareness. And so it was always mapped out with KPIs against each of those. And so I think we are staying true to that as an approach, actually, and that hasn't really changed as a result of COVID, because if anything, some of those KPIs from the software are more powerful now. And actually, I think if we are considering how industries are changing, how customer challenges, you know, and what they're faced with on a daily basis, one element of work that we've undertaken in the last few weeks has been to really understand how buy-in journeys are changing. People will transact and, you know, I think buy and purchase and make decisions across that buying journey in very different ways moving forward. So I feel that marketing actually has a real role to play with the guys in sales by being able to inform on what some of those buying journeys are. So we are adapting our approach in as much as we're doing that additional insight piece now to say, how do we need to evolve? I won't use the word pivot. I think there's a couple of words are banned as a result of COVID, that being one of them. But we are definitely looking therefore on how we change our strategy around that. So, and we're tailoring that on an account by account basis. but then looking at how, if I think of one to few, you know, probably mobilising. We haven't had a one to few approach here at Capita, probably until recently. So as I said at the start, we are definitely looking at how we now farm out into more of that, and then specifically wrapping an approach around deal-based marketing as well.
And yeah, that's a really interesting point about the buyer experience changing. I think the way that people, you know, obviously the reliance on digital channels, I think we touched on at the start, the environment that a buyer is in, it's going to be very, very difficult to buy actually, and to get stuff over the line. And I think there might be a big role that ABM can play in actually helping people manage stakeholders through that deal process.
I definitely, and one of the things, I mean, from a very tactical level, I don't know about you, Mark, but I love a bit of direct mail. It's old fashioned, it's, you know, very personalised. It's where the real creative stuff happens for a marketeer, isn't it? When you see those beautiful direct mail pieces. For me, one of my challenges right now is how do I still get that, but make that digital in a way that feels, you know, like you're opening a present on Christmas Day. So I haven't actually seen that yet, but that's my challenge, to think of how we add that back into the mix, given that, to the point you made, Mike, where would we send direct mail pieces to right now when no one's in offices, right? So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
It certainly is, isn't it? I think that certainly is a challenge. I think there are other challenges in other channels as well, right? I know I talked about events at the top of this, but you know, we have a really large scale event that we put on once a year, which is, you know, traditionally in the O2 with 1,000 or so customers. You know, we're not going to do that this year. So, you know, trying to remember if I used the word pivot before, I'm not going to use it this time either. But we're having to change our approach to that, adapt to a more virtual sense. But the challenge is, how do you still keep that level of engagement and really connect with people? And for our account teams, our salespeople who are there, how are they using that as an opportunity to network? You can't just walk around and host people in the same way. So massive challenges there, similar to your DM piece, you know, challenge, I think. And you know,
and like the webinar, I mean, webinars, they've been amazing, and podcasts, but you know, how do you think of that new creative cut through, isn't it, as a marketer? Go, oh wow, that's different, that's new, that's unique. So I think it's a challenge, but actually, as someone that loves that type of stuff, I think as a marketeer, to the points that both of you have made, the opportunities actually to be innovative and think of fresh ideas, I think is actually, you know, now is the time to be thinking of those things.
I've got a revolutionary idea for you, Kate. This new it's called video. It's going to be the future.
See, that's your sim qualification coming through.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to pick up, Mark, on your point around new business. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. In fact, I mean, there is an argument to say that whilst customers have got so much they want to think about, you know, they probably want to stay with their strategic suppliers. And so an emphasis on new business might not bear fruit just at the moment, unless your sort of prospects of winning are pretty strong. I mean, I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I call that prospect-based marketing anyways, as opposed to account-based marketing, because selfishly, as a key account manager, I want all my marketing dollars spent on existing accounts, not new business. But I think that just talking about marketing, though, you know, you have to be, every marketing dollar has to be spent wisely, doesn't it? So I agree, use of digital is really important because that tends to be lower cost. And the upfront analysis and segmentations around which accounts you're going to focus on, that upfront work is always important, but I think it's just even more important now because you have to be sure that you're spending your money wisely. So I think that analysis is key.
Yeah, I think I think the I wondered, Kate, whether you were going to suggest whether we, you know, whether instead of doing this webinar, we should be doing, you know, a sing-along or a wrap about account management, about ABM, which maybe we'll do next time. But I think, you know, it's have you seen, what tactics have you seen be successful? Have you found anything that has particularly worked over the last few months, or you think is going to be key going forward? I think video is a good point, Mike. I think that will has and will continue to be it for. Are there others that you guys have been using?
So for me, I think that it goes back to this point around the kernel of the idea, right? So if I think of how and what you're actually engaging with someone on first and foremost, I think is going to be the exciting bit. Because I think, if you look at all of the B2B marketing that has won awards across multiple platforms, and I know O2 is a perfect example of that. Actually, they've won awards with you guys at TMP, haven't they? What's been great about the premise is it's the premise behind the idea, isn't it? And then the delivery and the tactics that you use come second. So what we've been doing as a team at Capita is trying to think of that next big idea. What's the next hook? What's the way in which you can reach people with something that's a common goal that you'll mobilize around? Because with everyone being, I think people are more time poor now than ever before working from home. I think, work-life balance for most people, we're always here, aren't we? It's difficult to find the time to switch on. So I think finding that idea that really cuts through the noise is key for me. So yeah, that's what we're kind of focusing on a team around digital transformation, for example. So, how are you thinking about that in a very different way to what other organisations are right now?
Yeah, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Because I think, we see a lot of organizations all of a sudden talking about digital transformation and things like that, because, it is one thing that all organizations are all of a sudden looking at more seriously than they were before, is how you bring something different to that discussion. It's our challenge. I think there's another challenge, isn't there, in terms of, we haven't really touched on. It's the time horizon that our customers are working to now, and even we're being driven by our own businesses feels to me to be a little bit more short term in some respects. And I think that's critically important. But as marketeers, those of us who are on here anyway are marketeers. It's kind of, we've got to somehow push back against that. I'm not saying it's like an either or, we've got to satisfy the short-term demands, but also got to keep that eye on the mid to long term and think about, how these stories and how these programs will develop over time.
Yeah, and I think that there is that, we sort of touched on it earlier. I think that there's an interesting concept of kind of focusing on pipeline progression and pipeline acceleration, maybe in the current, as a way of finding a metric that you can influence in the short term that does matter to the business. And that I think is a real live concern, is how do you help customers actually do the stuff that they want, build the business case that they need to actually take the action that they need to transform. We've got a question from the audience, so I'll throw this one out there. When there are so many critical account renewals with pressure on price reductions, how do you support account managers in the lead up to these? Question.
I saw that question. It's a really good question, actually. But my first observation would be it's too late. You should have been thinking about this already. But that's a bit of a depressing answer. So to be a little bit more positive, think really hard about the value that your organisation's driving, and look at value-based pricing. So look at things like total cost of ownership. Don't just focus on the commoditized price, because that road typically doesn't end very well. So think about how your offer, your proposition, however you define it, is differentiated, and try and quantify that differentiation if you can, and think about truly the value that you're adding and bring that into the pricing mix. That would be my argument.
Yeah, I bet that point about quantification is really interesting, isn't it? I think that again, we might see more emphasis needed.
Don't wait until the RFP to decide how much value to
Yeah.
On a quantified value proposition in the current environment. It's a classic sim training, probably that, but it's still absent in a lot of places. Kate, Mark, have you any views on that?
I think the only thing, so I would agree with that. I think it's important not to be thinking of a retention program 3 months before the retention, because that's just not the way to approach it. You should have a long-term approach. But I think what was interesting there, Mike, that made me think is, around competitor intelligence, right? I think too often sometimes we forget the competitor research as well, to make sure that you really are differentiating your USP by doing some of that work. I think it's something that sometimes gets missed as part of that strategic approach on your laydown, and how you would approach something like that. So maybe add that to the mix.
Good. Okay, good. We've got just a few minutes left, so if anyone does want to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll just ask for a minute or two's closing thoughts. What would be, I guess, if you were talking to somebody setting out on their ABM journey, or in the early stage of their ABM journey, about what's going to be important to focus on over the next 6-12 months, what would be your top tip? Let's start with you, Mike. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would say don't experiment, take risks, be flexible in your approach. You can only win or learn. Those are the only two things that can happen.
Okay, very good. Kate?
So, I mean, look, I love being part of an ABM world because it's just it's highly personalised by nature. And so for me, that was one of the aspects of why I wanted to set up an ABM team. So I think, be highly personalised in everything that you do, given these priorities and strategies are changing daily. But I think ABM as a marketing strategy is here to stay, isn't it? And it will only thrive as we move forwards by having that personalised and flexible nature at its core.
Yeah, I think that's a very positive thought. Mark, anything to add?
I think I'll probably reinforce those points. Really, ABM is more important than ever in our business. I think the one piece of advice I'd say is don't be too wedded to your plans. Think agile. Think about how your approach can change over time. These are challenging times, aren't they? And I think there's a lot of disruption to come. So let's all be agile, and let's all not be too wedded to those plans to the detriment of change.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's the thing that's come out throughout, I think, hasn't it? The fact that ABM could be a tool to help you be adaptable and agile in your approach to market. And I know a lot of the stuff that we've learned on some of the programs that we've run, including the stuff with O2, is that when you're doing the one-to-one ABM and you really dive into the detail there, you're often digging up a lot of insight that you can then use to a wider audience. And this idea of creating clusters that might be industry based, but they might also be based on different things. Like there's one we did recently that was based on organizations that were less than 20-year-olds, but had these were retailers, online retailers, but had a surprisingly low percentage of visitors from mobile, because that suggested that they hadn't made the most of mobile. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But I think that idea of kind of going deep and then sort of throwing that insight back up and making use of that to a wider group might be important in the coming months as people think about how to scale, how to get value. And as you've been saying, Kate, how to really apply the skills that have been developed in one-to-one ABM to a different set of challenges, a broader set of challenges. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kate, Mike, Mark. Really enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully the attendees have too. As I said, we'll make sure this recording is available on our website. Thank you very much for the discussion.